Okay. Welcome to our Freedom Talks, part of the Freedom Circles from our political movement, República Libre. My name is Eric Fortunato, and I'm a member of República Libre. I'm a founding member of República Libre. We are a slash libertarian political organization, and we want to see a freer Dominican Republic, politically, economically, and socially. These talks started in 2020 to search for answers to the challenges that the COVID-19 brought to the ideas of freedom and individual liberties. Since 2021, we have broadened the talks to build relationships with other leaders and defenders of freedom for the sake of advancing these ideas in our country and the region. Today, we are honored to have with us Miguel Duque, Region 1 representative in the Libertarian National Committee of the Libertarian Party of the United States of America. Welcome, Miguel. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm doing very well. I really appreciate your time and your invitation to speak.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, we are the ones that are honored to have you with us, and that finally we were able to reach out and have this talk with with a member and with the Libertarian Party. So let's start with this question, and to give you context, in our region, the speech about freedom appears in different times. In the 19th century, there were parties that pursued freedom, but this pursuit gets kind of lost almost entirely in the 20th century. More recently, it has reappeared with movements and multiple initiatives from libertarian parties in Latin America. And we would like to know about the history of the U.S. Libertarian Party, who were the founders, what were they looking for, and what advice could you give to your libertarian brothers in Latin America?
Absolutely. Well, I think really, if you're looking at specifically the party, the Libertarian Party of the U.S., it was created in the early 70s, specifically in 1971 by a gentleman named David Nolan, and he really is the biggest person responsible for creating the Libertarian Party in the United States as an organization that would move forward a philosophy and a movement that had already begun to form and come about. And I think it has a lot of history, really going back to the Enlightenment and the classical liberal philosophers, political philosophers, economists, etc. And later in the 1900s, and then going into the 70s, there was a really strong anti-war movement as a response to the Vietnam War. There were all kinds of like social and political changes going on in the United States. And the Libertarian Party sought to be an answer to that and an alternative to the big corrupt political systems and the big, political parties here in the US. So I guess another thing I would add to that, mentioning David Nolan, is that there were a lot of different activists that were key in shaping the party, though David Nolan wrote out a lot of the founding principles. And the Libertarian Party, we refer to ourselves as the party of principle. And so we strive to be about philosophical principles, which are lined out in what's called our statement of principles. It was crafted and passed in 1974, and it has not changed since 1974. You can see the full version on our website at lp.org/platform. But the opening statement of the Statement of Principles is: we, the members of the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state and defend the rights of the individual. And that was passed in 1974, and I think best summarizes our mission as an organization. For our friends listening in Spanish, which I do know some Spanish, I wanted to translate it as best as I could. And essentially, it says that we, the members of the Libertarian Party, um, desafiamos el culto del Estado omnipotente y defendemos los derechos del individuo.
Mm.
So I think that's really key to understand why our organization was created. It was to challenge the omnipotent state and people who um, so strongly believe in big government that they really are like a cult. And I think we can see that socially and in the culture nowadays because um, it goes beyond just the political system, but it's gone throughout our culture. Um, and so we're here to challenge that cult and defend the rights of the individual. And that's the best I could do to summarize it. Um, and one last thing I would add towards this question of what the history of the party is and why it was created, who the founders were, is another key individual early on in the party's history was a gentleman named Ed Crane, and
Mm.
he served as chair of the party for multiple terms, starting from 1974. And he said, "I strongly believe that the purpose of the Libertarian Party is 100% educational. And this doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to elect people to public office. Clearly, we should. What it means is that we must never forget that freedom will not be won in Congress, but only in educating the populace to the ideas of liberty. There is no
Mm.
conflict between political action and education as long as getting elected does not become the primary objective." So I think that that is just another, that was a quote from Ed Crane that I think gives perspective to what the founders of the Libertarian Party were seeking to do, is mainly to change hearts and minds, which political success really only follows from that if we're successful in spreading the ideas of freedom.
Excellent. And based on that history and those principles, what advice could you then give to us here, not only here in the Dominican Republic, but to um, the other movements and parties in Latin America based on that?
Sure. Well, um, I think that what we've been seeing success in the United States with the Libertarian Party, with the Libertarian movement as a whole, and I think what people are seeking right now is building community among people that are drawn to these ideas. And I think that we're in a unique time where people are really hungry for um, new philosophy that challenges what we've always been taught. People are skeptical
Mm.
about what the government has been teaching us in schools, what the media tells us on TV, um, and we can go really far just by opening up conversation on these philosophical principles and how they can apply today. So, I mean, I think that um, we can find others, who are not really wanting to comply or participate in big government, and basically teach them the history of the philosophy.
Excellent. Thank you very much. In Latin America, we have a political tradition that is quite presidential, and that is why usually as libertarians we are reproached because in the US the Libertarian Party has not achieved the presidency yet. To this, what do you suggest we should answer to them?
Well, I think we have oftentimes a similar challenge in the US because there's not been a libertarian elected to president. And so many people who will only pay attention to politics so much that they're really only looking at who is president, they won't know about libertarians. However, a lot of people are skeptical to begin with that um, the president really represents the people, that it's a fair election, and that the Republicans or the Democrats, will ever put anybody um, into the presidency who's going to, advance liberty or work for the little guy. I would say, as an answer to that question, just to encourage people to think locally and act locally, because the higher you go up in government or in politics, like national elections, whether it's in the United States or I would venture to guess national politics in the Dominican Republic, um, it's going to be harder to influence, and it's going to be the political system, whether it's elections or lawmaking, is going to be really heavily designed to benefit those who want more power and already have a lot of power and money and influence. The big establishment parties, companies who fund politicians. Um, it's typically really geared towards uh, these big institutions that are not really libertarian. Whereas on a local level, we can organize to build local community and help people that you live around and you see on a day-to-day basis and you hopefully do business with, um, and they're your neighbors and you support each other. Help those people appreciate freedom and liberty, and help make each other less dependent on big government and big corporations. So I think that is where um, people who really want to achieve freedom can have a lot more influence, is on your local level, whether it's your town or city or even smaller, your neighborhood.
Thank you so much, and it's interesting because you talked about building communities, and it seems that not going too fast, because if you want just to reach um, the same with the same methods, you are just gonna end up working with the people that are doing the same thing that you are like against. And we have been telling people that we cannot rush into power. We cannot just rush into the presidential race, because at the end, to the campaign and whoever's gonna support us is gonna be in the same kind of people and the same kind of groups that we don't want to be with, nor be like, nor be confused with, because they are doing this all this all this kind of races that in the end it is the same corruption, and it is the same thing, the same banners, that we are supposed to be different. So thanks a lot for that. That's really interesting. And taking taking that as a lead, um, you talk about building communities. So at the present time, when we talk about the Libertarian Party of the U.S., which political positions, charges have been obtained that could be used as a model for us to reach and to do, if we are able to get those same positions?
Sure. Well, I just want to first ask, if you are particularly interested in who has won elections or who has won office, or if you are thinking more in terms of um, issues or sort of like platform positions, where you want to focus on specific issues, or do you mean which political offices have been
Yeah,
successfully won?
Yeah, in the terms of political offices, or that if somebody has been appointed because somebody else also got elected, and what kind of work is doing that is great, or that has been done that should be continued, but it hasn't been continued. So people that either got elected to a political office, or that were appointed by somebody else also that got into office, and that he's a libertarian.
Yes. Well, the most of the offices that we have won, because the Libertarian Party, even though we don't currently have anyone um, serving in national congressional positions, we have won many local races, particularly city
Mhm.
council races, um, even like school boards, mayor positions. Just in this past election in November in
Mhm.
2022, we did have someone win mayor in Colorado for a small town in Colorado. We got a number of other people who won city council positions, and we did have some people win school board positions. And so these smaller local races we find are where there's less competition, and that it's easier for um, a libertarian who isn't associated with the big parties to win, because they don't need as much money to campaign or to win on small local level races. On the national level, though, I will say that we did have um, in 2021 a congressman that was actually a member of the Libertarian Party, and that was Justin Amash,
Mhm.
and he was already in Congress. He won uh, his congressional seat in Michigan as a Republican, and then later he changed he basically became independent and no longer affiliated with the Republican Party. But before he ever got into Congress, he was already very much from the libertarian school of thought, and heavily influenced by libertarian and classical liberal economics, history, etc. And so he really was already very well versed in the libertarian philosophy and movement, and ultimately decided, that the Libertarian Party would be his home. So we were very happy and proud for that to happen. And we did have a sitting U.S. congressman until Justin Amash's term ended, and so we currently don't have anyone in Congress. I would say though, finally, on your question about who has won office, I definitely would point to Ron Paul, because Ron Paul initially, Dr. Ron Paul of Texas, initially ran for president in 1988 as a libertarian with the Libertarian Party. And so he was
Okay.
involved with the liberty movement, the libertarian movement, from the early days. Um, After that, he was a congressman for many years, and although he was associated with the Republican Party, everyone in the Republican Party, practically treated him like their enemy, and he got ignored. And all despite that, he made a lot of really positive impact, truly as a libertarian congressman, although not someone who was running under the banner of the party. But he was the most libertarian congressman that we've ever had, for sure. So I would definitely also point to Ron Paul as someone who is a really good model for um, for achieving, and spreading liberty.
And those races that you mentioned for city council and school boards, can you name any? I don't know if they were just like recent, or before also, but could you talk a little bit more about those races and what had then been achieving in those cities?
Well, they were very recent, and so to be honest, I'd have to pull up a list of our various winners. We got at least 2 dozen local, libertarians elected to local offices throughout the United States, and and even well after the election, results continue to trickle in. So I don't even necessarily have in front of me um, an exhaustive list of everyone who won. But I would say that, with races like that, sometimes they're uncontested or sometimes um, there's very little competition in those races. And so I
Mm,
would say that often luck plays a role in
okay.
winning office. And it where I saw most people win
Mm-hmm.
were in states where the Libertarian Party managed to recruit 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 people to run for local offices. And ultimately, maybe they had 5 people win, but they still had a lot of people win. So it really came down to local organizing and recruiting for people to run for office. And then in some cases, people get lucky because even if a lot of the public who votes doesn't know what a libertarian is and doesn't think that a libertarian can win, in some cases they find that there aren't that many options, or maybe they read about the libertarian candidate and they really like what they have to say. And so sometimes, it's a matter of be getting a little bit lucky in elections.
Do you know where those races were?
Sure. Give me one
Oh,
moment because I'm
where we
pulling up.
can
Uh-huh.
see that list in the website of the Libertarian Party. Will you tell us?
We should have somewhere on lp.org a list of current elected libertarians. But I did just find from my region, region one of the LP, we have I mentioned someone in Colorado who won mayor, and he's in Keensburg, Colorado. His name is Aaron Lamb. So I'm typing it for you. We have multiple
Okay.
libertarians in Nebraska, in the state of Nebraska, won elected office. There was Cole Brodeen, who was elected to school board. Jeremy Westengard was elected to his city council, and that he's in Gretna, Nebraska. Um, Also in
But hey, that's quite
Nebraska.
an achievement because I mean he got to get elected mayor.
Yes, yeah, we're really excited about that. Even if a lot of our local libertarians are in small towns, they can make a really big impact on the small local level in combating big government because local governments really do have a lot of power to put checks and balances on big government at the state level or the national level. you know and so that's why we're really aiming to focus more on getting city council members elected, sheriffs. A sheriff on in a county area is the highest ranking law enforcement officer in that area, and they can say we're not going to enforce this law because it is unconstitutional and it's unjust. And so local officials can have a lot more influence, I think, than people realize.
Yep. Awesome. Then let's talk about now labels that people usually do use uh, for political parties and people in the political parties in our region. Sometimes in the public debate, tries to label libertarians either to the right or to the left according to the interest of the moment, whatever is convenient at the moment. In the case of the Libertarian Party, what could we say distinguishes your party from the Democrat and the Republican Party?
Well, I would say that the ideas of left wing or right wing, you could say that a person is culturally left wing or right wing, or socially left wing or right wing. And though they might not necessarily be politically Republican or Democrat, because the Republican and Democrat parties are both authoritarian and they both support big government. They are you see that in every major Democrat or Republican politician is they always, even though they have different rhetoric, they have different um, arguments that they make. Ultimately, what they end up voting on and passing is more spending, more social programs, more military intervention, more all kinds of just really unjust things. Terrible, like mass surveillance. Um, they even, even when Trump was president here, he increased the size of government both domestically and internationally. And so, um, really what you get with the Democrat and Republican governments are more government, whereas libertarians, maybe they're either culturally, you could say they're either culturally more left leaning or culturally right leaning, but they don't want to use government or use force to make other people be like them, left or right.
Hmm.
And some people are not necessarily, a lot of people don't really fall into those boxes. They're a mix you know, of different cultures, different preferences and lifestyles. But ultimately, we just want to coexist peacefully and not use government to tell people how to live their lives.
Okay, so the Democrat Party and the Republican Party are two sides of a coin of totalitarianism versus the Libertarian Party that tries to go towards freedom and less government. Okay, thank you very much. Um, then, what would you say to someone that instead of left or right tries to label your party as Republicans that are seeking less taxes, but in everything else are the same?
Well, I would say if you actually look at Republicans' policies, they end up, if not increasing taxes, they really cut virtually no taxes, and they're very big on spending. Lots of military spending, even social spending. George Bush, um, he increased social spending in the healthcare industry, in education, and he increased the size and scope of government in all different areas. Um, and he might have sort of symbolic had some uh, essentially symbolic tax cuts or what have you, but the size of government increased under all of our Republican politicians. So um, libertarians, on the other hand, actually work towards drastically less taxes. Not just 3% or 5% less taxes, but radically, anti taxation and against government spending, because libertarians see all those social programs or even military programs as just a form of socialism. And so we oppose all of those.
Okay, so now let's talk about leadership. In our region, some say that strong and centralized leadership should be backed. That when you compete, you take votes from the Republican Party, making it easier for the Democrats to govern. For us, it will be of great value to know what you think in this regard. because in our countries, conservatives insist to the general population that they should vote for the same right wing parties as always, because voting for libertarians is wasting the vote by letting the left wing parties win.
Well, in the United States, we definitely have, people who say similar things. And I think that they just haven't thought it through very much because even when more of their Republican candidates or politicians are elected, they don't actually do what they typically are promising to do. Um, there's, I believe is it Scott Horton? Um, yeah, Scott Horton is a really great author up here in the US. Writes particularly on foreign policy, but on all kinds of libertarian politics. And he's coined something that some people call Horton's Law, which is that a candidate's good promises when they're campaigning, a candidate's good promises are the ones that you can expect them to not follow through on, and their bad promises are the ones that you can definitely expect for them to do. So, um, whenever a candidate is campaigning on lowering taxes or lessening, rolling back big government, usually they seem to forget about it once they're in power because the people who help get them elected are, you know, donating to them and expecting them to make more laws that favor whatever big companies or big interests are lobbying them.
Okay, you talk about before about running locally, and I'm guessing that based on that, the answer to this question will be like in those lines. But um, currently, what would you recommend to libertarians in Latin America that they focus on town hall, city hall, and Congress, or that they push projects with the aspiration of reaching the presidency as quickly as possible?
Well, I wish I was better versed in kind of the unique politics to the Dominican Republic. However, I would just imagine that if you have any similarities to things going on in the United States, um, I would think that libertarians in Dominican Republic could advocate locally to give funding and power and choices back to people and their families with regards to things like education, as opposed to most politicians are always either, arguing for more funding for education. They always say it's just that the public schools don't get enough money. But ultimately, it's really families that should be getting more of their tax dollars back to be able to educate their children. Um, I'm a big proponent, and a lot of libertarians in the US are big proponents of homeschooling and basically getting kids out of public schools because they're not actually good at educating children, and they're extremely wasteful. So, education and schooling is a big issue on the local level. And I would also say, just over the past 2 years, um, local governments have seized a lot more power um, as a result of the COVID lockdowns. And
Mm,
so that's a hot issue here, because so many small businesses were shut down and ultimately didn't open back up. There was devastating effects of the COVID lockdowns, and people can, get out and speak to that on a local level much more effectively than they could at the national level.
yeah, I agree with working locally on like the topic of education. We actually have a proposal. We have a whole program for education that enables all families to choose where they want to put their the childrens, and we give autonomy to schools, and we use Milton Friedman voucher. That strategy we use that, and and our plan reduces the whole Ministry of Education. The Well, you will have the Secretary of Education and the Department of Education. We will reduce it to a I don't know if you have the if you have the figure of superintendents there. I don't know if you have something like that, but we will reduce it to superintendents of an oversight of education that will only uh, deal with conflicts, but it will not impose a curriculum. Curriculum and all that will be left to the schools and the teachers to decide what they will teach, and who to hire to be in the schools.
That's awesome. Since you mentioned Milton Friedman and his school voucher, essentially, you know, program or efforts, I I would definitely point you to checking out a gentleman named Corey DeAngelis. He he actually came out of the Friedman Foundation and has been really successfully pushing school choice um, policies in a number of different states in the United States. So recently, the state of Arizona, thanks to um, some of Corey's support to a school choice coalition in Arizona, they passed a school choice bill that gives families and parents a lot more freedom with regard to how to use their tax dollars for their children's education. And that was a very big win
Hmm.
for basically more freedom in education. And he's definitely he has a good model for how to write policy to allow families to get their tax dollars back.
Awesome. We will check that out. Yeah, it's really interesting and really good, and we are pushing a lot for to convince both conservative sides and more progressive that it's better for the government not to be involved in with the education. What we have done is to come up with this proposal that adapts this Sweden model to to our needs, and definitely we will be checking out uh, uh, that link and that source that you're talking about.
Yeah, his name is Corey DeAngelis, and his
Corey
main
DeAngelis,
his
that
he
person.
works with a number of different organizations. He works with Cato Institute, but one of
Mm,
his main organizations is called Federation for Children. So that would be a good one to check out. It's federationforchildren.org.
excellent. Miguel, usually there are many debates among libertarians on different topics, which is good because that indicates that we are thinking individuals and that we are not a herd. But sometimes in politics, it is necessary to maintain certain general guidelines to unify a political movement. In the case of the Libertarian Party of the United States, what are those general guidelines uh, that you are currently pushing as an organization together in the public agenda of the United States?
This is an excellent question because my involvement and my passion in the libertarian movement, especially in recent years, has been to unite the libertarian movement because as a movement, as a philosophical movement, there's been a lot of evolution and learning over the years of what what we really believe, and how it applies to the current day. And so there's always been infighting and not really always healthy debate, but really detrimental um, and uncooperative, unproductive debate and infighting within the movement. So I really want to see libertarians unite around what we're really about. And it takes me back to um, what I was mentioning about the founding of the party and David Nolan, because when I was thinking about this recently, I looked up David Nolan, and I'd encourage others to take a look at his page on our. We have a wiki. Basically, it's called Lpedia, and I'll post a link here for you, Eric, and perhaps you'd like to share it. But David Nolan, who founded the Libertarian Party, you'll see on this page, he argued that there are 5 key things that libertarians have to focus on that unite us. Um, and these are points of no compromise. Really, we can't compromise on these principles. Um, First, that you own yourself, that every individual owns their life and their self and their body and has ultimate autonomy to choose how they live their lives as long as they're not hurting anyone else. Secondly, there's the right to self defense. So, Mr. Nolan argued that this is really crucial to libertarian philosophy, that um, in being proponents of peace, we have to we have to protect people's right to defend peace in their lives. So, in so many terrible situations throughout history, big authoritarian governments disarmed their population, took people's guns away, and it left them defenseless against terrible atrocities. So, um, that is a key thing. A third thing that Mr. Nolan argued was essential to libertarianism is having no criminal possession laws. So, in other words, like the war on drugs is an attack on people's right to live peacefully. That you can't criminalize possession of something if you're not hurting someone else. Fourthly, there was no taxes on productivity. So libertarians really, um, we shouldn't disagree on being against taxation of income or people's just basic economic um, activities. So, and then finally, a sound money system, and that's at the core, I would argue, of economic freedom. Because if you don't have freedom in money, and money is controlled through central banking and the printing and creation of fiat currency that isn't backed by any actual sound money like gold or silver, then you're not going to have a free market economy, because the money is depreciating and being devalued, and it's really all, the whole system of money is designed to benefit the big banks and the more politically connected um, politicians and companies. So those are the 5 key things, really, that you own yourself, that you have the right to defend yourself, that it's not a crime for you to possess a drug or something else that's not hurting anyone, um, that you should not be taxed on your productivity, and that we need sound money, basically. So um, that fifth thing, the kind of central banking and fiat currency aspect of it, I would say, is a major achievement of Ron Paul, who I mentioned. He brought a lot more awareness to the issue of having sound money and the value of gold and silver. And that's something that even on the local level, libertarians can make progress in just educating people, but also practicing the use of sound money. Because if you start to do business with more people locally and in your neighborhood, you don't necessarily just have to use whatever fiat currency people typically use, like the US dollar. You can use silver, you can use gold, you can barter, you can use cryptocurrencies. So that's an area I think where we can both educate people and also practice what we preach.
Excellent. Those are quite fantastic guidelines. If the Libertarian Party had enough political power, what will be the four main policies that you will seek to implement?
Well, very good question. There's so many, there are so many problems, that have gone unchecked for a very long time, and it's really hard to think about how would we prioritize what needs to be done and in what order, because we need really drastic action. But definitely up there somewhere in the top four, if not the number one, would be full audit investigation, um, declassifying a lot of documents, and figuring out what people involved in government have been doing in secret for many, many decades, whether it's in the Federal Reserve and how they're manipulating the economy through money printing and interest rates and all their other central banking practices, um, declassifying, investigating, auditing what our militaries and the intelligence state, the intelligence communities have been doing in secret, um, really interfering in foreign relations and even domestic society. So I think for starters, we'd have to like really expose a lot of things to the light that have been kept secret in order for people to understand why big government has to be dismantled, has to be broken up. A lot of laws have to be repealed because people don't know a lot of what our government has done in secret to basically sabotage our ability to thrive and succeed. So I think we would definitely work towards ending the Federal Reserve and taking the economy back to sound money, whether it's gold or silver or even perhaps cryptocurrency, but really giving people the freedom to decide what money they use and how they spend it. Um, and then another big thing would be ending all the wars, bringing all of our troops home, getting uninvolved in meddling in other countries' business and threatening other countries, and just trying to grow the whole global military empire, that the United States is really heavily responsible for. We would want to get out of entangling alliances like NATO, and again, just bring our troops home, and stop funding all these bad actors in different countries, terrorists. Um, Really, the United States is responsible for a lot of the terrorism and instability in so many countries that we claim that we're trying to fix, when in reality we're creating all those problems. So, um, and then I guess thirdly, there's there's a lot of powers that the government of the United States has seized without actually writing laws. Um, the U.S. federal government has uh, declared states of emergency from not just COVID and the pandemic, but 9/11. They still have states of emergency for the global war on terror and all these powers that they're claiming to have that they never even passed through Congress. So ending the states of emergencies and you know uh, interference by all of the intelligence agencies.
In terms of foreign policy, what will be the foreign policy of the USA towards Latin America if the Libertarian Party governed?
Well, I would think that because the United States has, for a long, long time, had imperialist policies towards Latin America that really kind of still exist, just in a different format. Um, Now it's like economic imperialism, and that goes back to our currency, our monetary policies. Um, the United States government has loaned out so much money to Latin American countries and required countries in Latin America to spend that money with American corporations and become dependent on big American corporations, big agriculture, energy companies, uh, building infrastructure and things like that. And so a lot of times these big they call them free trade policies, are not so much free trade, but really putting pressure on countries throughout the world and in Latin America to get so heavily invested in American corporations, um, through debt creation and stimulus programs and things like that, that it's just a different form of imperialism. And um, and I think has um, that has unfortunately motivated different Latin American countries to want to side with socialism or authoritarian governments, because they kind of want their country and their government to be stronger to fight back against the American government. But in reality, if we had real free trade and sound money, and brought more of our military and our troops back home and stopped interfering in foreign policy in the way that we do, then I think we would just have very happy and beneficial relations, just trading and um, exchanging freely.
And how will that free trade in Latin America look like? So let's say that you're able to change the monetary system and deal with the Fed. In the terms of free trade, we will it be like, okay, so let's make a block of countries, and let's make an agreement with many countries in Latin America, or like one by one. So how will that free trade look like from the U.S. point of view in a libertarian government?
Well, I would think that it wouldn't so much be directed by governments. It would be more directed just by um, basically private companies, but perhaps smaller private companies than the ones that already the big companies go to government to set up these free trade agreements just to benefit themselves, and instead of benefiting true free trade, it puts a disadvantage on smaller companies, smaller producers, small farmers, um, you know, uh, just kind of things on a more local level. People end up, due to these free trade agreements, end up being more. dependent on big corporations. So honestly, I think it would not be it would there would not be so much involvement by government in seeing to free trade. It would more just be rolling back a lot of these free trade agreements.
Okay. Usually in the world of libertarianism, everyone has their favorite authors. Some will go for Hayek, others go for Milton Friedman, others Adam Smith, Bastiat, Ayn Rand, Rothbard, Hans Hermann Hope, von Mises, among others. Which of these do you understand, or will you say that is the most popular among members of the Libertarian Party?
Well, I think every every author that you named, Hayek, Friedman, Bastiat, Ayn Rand, Rothbard, those, they're all essential reading. And, definitely select works of all of those, I think, are essential to libertarians getting the right foundation for their philosophy and principles. I think of those, some of the most popular would probably be Rothbard. Rothbard is extremely popular amongst US libertarians, but he might not be necessarily the most popular for people starting out. One of the most popular books that we recommend or even give to people whenever we are able to get a hold of copies of the book that we can give away would be Economics in One Lesson by Henry
Henry
Hazlitt.
Hazlitt. Hmm.
That's one of the most popular books for anybody who's newer to libertarian ideas and certainly to free market economics. I think that Hazlitt, it's very easy to understand and digest. I think that another top book that we always recommend or give away is The Law by Frederick Bastiat.
Mm.
And then I would say that oftentimes, like if you've read those two, then you might be ready to read Rothbard. And in particular, I would recommend Anatomy of the State, which is kind of just like more like an essay or a short book by Rothbard. And it's definitely foundational, I would say, for the libertarian philosophy. And beyond those, um, a few people that I would name would be I'm a big fan of Tom Woods. Tom Woods is a prolific author, best-selling author. He's a really great podcaster and educator and entrepreneur, and he's written so many good books, including many that are available for free. So I would just shout out Tom Woods and his free ebooks. That's like a joke, kind of amongst his fans is all his free ebooks. He's always offering a free ebook, and you can actually go to tomsfreebooks.com and see a
Okay.
list of all his free ebooks that he was written on education, on self-defense, on economics, and so many other things. So Tom Woods is really good. He definitely would be up there with like most popular libertarian authors, especially living libertarian authors. And if I could name a couple more that I found to be really insightful, like more recently, um, I think it was last year or the year before, a new book was released by Michael Malice called The New Right. And although it's not really about libertarianism per se. I think it sheds a lot of insight on just what's happening in global politics, in political philosophy in the current day. And so kind of goes back to your question about left wing versus right wing and what those things really even mean. I think that Michael Malice in his book The New Right um, really explains things really effectively. So that's a really helpful book for people to understand what's going on in politics today, and where libertarians kind of play into that because um, you know there are there are definitely ways that libertarians have influenced conservatives or people on the right in positive ways, I would say, um, and vice versa on the left as well. So yeah, I think those would be a few recommendations I could make, and mention some authors who are really popular.
Awesome. Give me just a sec. Okay, you still hear me well?
Yes,
And I can hear you well. Awesome. So, in our region, we hear a lot about the fact that the Mises Caucus has recently won, taking over the leadership of the Libertarian Party, and there is a lot of interest abroad about what exactly the Mises Caucus is, what concrete ideas it pushes, and what is its vision of what the Libertarian Party should do to achieve its objectives. Want to know about that? And are there more political caucuses, and what are the names?
sure. So to start with the first question about what the Mises Caucus, what ideas it pushes, and what the goal is, um, I'll say that basically, in recent years, I'd say within the last 10 years in American politics, there's been like this whole idea of social justice, identity politics, and sort of like, people will call it woke, the woke agenda. Um, that has been, a big socially divisive um, kind of area, of discussion, and the libertarian movement was not immune to that. Um, some people involved in the Libertarian Party definitely started playing into identity politics and social justice type of causes, and basically targeting other prominent libertarians with their identity politics. So I mentioned Ron Paul being a major figure in the liberty movement, someone who exposed millions of people to libertarian ideas through his presidential runs, particularly in 2008 and 2012. Um, he was he was gathering crowds of thousands at college campuses to hear him speak. He got on the debate stage and said some incredible things about ending the wars, about sound money, and about auditing and ending the Federal Reserve. So he was really awesome. And our libertarian movement, and not just party, but movement as a whole in the US, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to Ron Paul for growing the movement and educating people. And there were people associated with the Libertarian Party that became very antagonistic towards Ron Paul. Tom Woods is someone who was a key figure in the Ron Paul campaigns as well. And even more broadly, other people associated with the Austrian School of Economics. Ron Paul and Tom Woods would definitely be associated with the Austrian School of Economics. Um, and there's basically like Ludwig von Mises, Rothbard, um, Hans Hermann Hoppe. These are all people associated with the Austrian School of Economics, which has a particular focus on monetary policy that diverges from the monetary policy of, for example, Milton Friedman, who is associated with the Chicago School. And so there were philosophical and kind of like not ideological per se, but different points of disagreement among the Austrian economists versus the Chicago School economists. And I think that has, like, that's kind of it's gone beyond just disagreements about economics to now disagreements about social issues. And basically, to sum it up, like previous spokespeople of the Libertarian Party started accusing Ron Paul and Tom Woods and other Austrian school people of being racist or bigoted or all kinds of other things, right? And so this idea of identity politics became really weaponized and really toxic and really detrimental towards unity of the libertarian movement. And it was as a result of that that the Mises Caucus was created initially basically as a Facebook group in 2017. And then over the course of our national Libertarian Party conventions in 2018, 2020, and then most recently in 2022, ultimately, the Mises Caucus um, and the efforts by the Mises Caucus led to a huge influx of new members to the Libertarian Party, many of whom were already Ron Paul fans, were heavily influenced by Ron Paul, or brought to libertarianism by Ron Paul, um, where they were recruited, to join the Libertarian Party, and ultimately saw that the previous party spokespeople were very antagonistic towards Ron Paul and the Austrian school. And so the goal of the Mises Caucus has basically been to correct that and to get the Libertarian Party better on a better track with messaging and education of not just Austrian economics, but also to no longer engage in that sort of toxic, identity politics that we started seeing, because it's so socially divisive that we're not going to win people to our cause if we're having them focus on social disagreements, about whether they're left wing or right wing, as opposed to being libertarian and being against authoritarianism. We really want that to be the focus. Um, there's probably more I could say about that, but that would just be to summarize what the Mises Caucus was about. There are some other caucuses, and a caucus really it's just any segment of the party membership that wants to work together within the party to advance a certain cause. So there's all kinds of different, you know, kind of more narrow or specific caucuses. Um, there, but the biggest ones would be the Mises Caucus. There's also the Classical Liberal Caucus,
Okay.
which basically is a proponent of a lot of the same thinkers and authors that the Mises Caucus is a fan of. Ludwig von Mises, Hayek, a lot of those other great authors. But they basically like it's very nuanced, but the Classical Liberal Caucus generally wants not such radical messaging as the Mises Caucus, or the Radical Caucus is another caucus that has been around in the LP for much longer.
Also, there's also the radical caucus. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, those would probably be, if you were to point out the three largest caucuses in the Libertarian Party, it would probably be the Mises Caucus, the Classical Liberal Caucus, and the Radical Caucus. So,
And so the Mrs. Caucus is also is then focusing on like getting to the people by like messaging and like doing some like let's say hard messaging for people to understand more liberty
I would
and the
say, yeah, I would say the Mises Caucus wants bolder messaging that's not it's not so sympathetic to the narratives that are pushed by the mainstream media
okay.
and by you know people in government. So definitely against identity politics, against the woke agenda, um, and really wanting to better educate people about sound money and about ending the wars. I think that the kind of the more radical libertarians um, are they're much bolder when it comes to being anti-war and you know being proponents of sound money. Whereas some of the more like more pragmatic libertarians can shy away from saying, "Oh yeah, we want to bring all the troops home," because that sounds too radical to some people. So um, there's so much nuance to this discussion. There's a lot that could be said about this.
Yeah.
That's about as best as I can summarize it. You know,
Okay. The only other thing that I don't know if it might put you in a little bit like of a difficult spot, but with all that we have been seeing like from afar, we see that okay that the Libertarian Party in the terms of like messaging has like a whole decentralized structure, but we have seen in the social network, principally in Twitter, like different accounts with some messaging, and like we know that even the for example there have been issues, and the even the chair of the national committee, she even spoke that hey, so people are like just complaining that and they're just like talking about this, but the press is not focusing on what we have been trying to solve for those that are like uh, those radical messages that maybe we are not maybe we don't agree with, and because of there is this decentralization of the party. Um, how is the party internally trying to like to deal with those in different states that are that okay? So you want to push a different message, but maybe uh, there are messages that are like too radical, maybe like beyond what the Mrs. Caucus or even the party wants to put out there. So what is the party trying to do, and what is going to be done in regards to that, or I mean, what can be done in terms of that?
great question. I would say basically more importantly than anything is that libertarians just have to lead by example, and that goes towards politics, externally to what we're saying and doing to win over voters and win over, the culture, and also internally in our party organization. Um, People need to lead by example and just, do the best that they can to model how we can most effectively get the message out, educate people, and basically be telling the truth. And we have to whenever other people diverge, including state parties, state affiliates of our national party, they run autonomously, they run independently of the national party, as you noted. It is a decentralized structure. So the national party can't and shouldn't just go into any particular state and tell them how to run their party. We should just strive to lead by example and to show people how to best focus on the right issues and how to explain things. And I would say to give we're generally practicing uh, criticizing privately and praising publicly. So when we have a
Mm,
disagreement with another libertarian online, on Twitter, or wherever it is, if we have criticisms, then a lot of times we can be more effective taking those criticisms to that person or those people privately, and we can be more effective putting out better messaging by praising the type of messaging that we do want to see. And I think that there's still a place, obviously, for publicly debating and disagreeing. in a productive way. But honestly, a lot of things can be cured and solved by better cooperation, um, offline. Call somebody on the phone,
Hmm.
or reach out to them directly, and remember what you're working towards and what brings you together, so that the disagreements you have can be put in perspective, that we share the same fundamental principles, we're on the same team, and if we have a strategic disagreement, then that's something that we hopefully can work together in good faith, or work out in good faith.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Before you talk about the Trump administration and a lot of spending, in regards to that, what criticisms has the Libertarian Party made of the past Trump administration and the current Biden administration, uh, that you guys understand the press should point out more and isn't doing?
Sure. Well, I would think that, I know personally, and what I see from a lot of libertarians right off the bat, one of the things that we would criticize Trump for the most would be the administration that he put in place. Um, Even despite his whole campaign talking about wanting to drain the swamp, ultimately he put people in positions of power like John Bolton as his Secretary of Defense, or who is a total warmonger, war hawk. He hired people like Anthony Fauci, and he just hired terrible people to his administration, um, and did all kinds of you know um, horrendous big government programs like, I mean, Operation Warp Speed, you know, all the national lockdowns and things that he basically helped put in place. He seized a lot of power through his administration, despite having control of the White House and Congress and the Senate. What did they do? They actually infringed on gun rights by expanding red flag laws and banning various gun accessories like bump stocks. Um, he committed terrible war crimes and atrocities in Yemen. And even though he campaigned as someone who was wanting to put America first, and potentially end many of the unnecessary wars, he didn't really do that. And he just, in most in the most significant ways, he's just a continuation of the Obama and Bush administrations. And really, you know, Biden's the same way on all accounts. He's a continuation of the previous administrations. Most of it is really just symbolic in the rhetoric that they use. Um, and
Hmm.
so, you know, that goes for the Republican and Democrat parties, but also for specifically the Trump administration versus the Biden administration. Biden administration, talks a lot about preserving democracy, and both in the U.S. and all across the world. And a lot of it is really just symbolic rhetoric, even though they're doing all the same things.
And excuse me my ignorance, but you were telling about the lockdowns and that the Trump administration helped um to for uh, for those lockdowns to happen. But it was I was under the impression that Trump didn't want to do lockdowns and that everything like occur like at the state level. But
Well,
I might be completely ignorant of some facts, but I was under the impression that he didn't want to like lock down so much, and that in the when he wanted like to open, it was not dependent on the White House or the federal level. It was more like state in the state level.
That would be true procedurally. In most cases, it was the state governments that were enacting the lockdowns. And it's a lot of, hiding from, it's a lot of like um, passing the buck and um, passing accountability off to someone else.
Mm,
But a lot of these state governments, in order to declare states of emergency and enact lockdowns, they were pointing to the federal government, the CDC, the WHO, and all these other bigger national or international organizations. And like I mentioned, Trump put Fauci in charge
mm,
of that whole situation. He started Operation Warp Speed, um, and there were like old what is it, the War Production Act, I want to say War Production Act, the Trump administration really kind of like enacted a lot of big corporate control in production of the vaccines, of producing and distributing ventilators, and all the other medical stuff involved with the lockdowns. Um, the Trump administration and the federal government played a very heavy hand. Although when you hear Trump specifically in his rhetoric, um, again, I think it's mostly symbolically. You know, he would say things like, "Oh, we'll be open by Easter," but he really knows, all his people are telling him, we're not going to be we're not going to be open again by Easter. This is a whole multi-year long state of emergency, and I think that Trump was completely complicit in all the authoritarian, response to COVID.
I'm guessing that all that thing and all the Operation Warp Speed, that there are then things that we don't see and we don't know, and, and we only got from here. We only got to see, like, okay, so everybody's like celebrating Operation Warp Speed, and like the U.S. is like doing a bunch of testing, like South Korea, and like we have the vaccines and all that, and like, I mean, so, and everything was like a celebration, but um, maybe not. Maybe everything that it's said or celebrated is not like that.
Well, actually, that's exactly what I would point to as far as the celebration. It's really confusing, where most Trump supporters probably still today have the perception that Trump was against the lockdowns and against the COVID regime. But in reality, Trump is still out there celebrating that he created these incredible vaccines that saved millions of lives. And he's so proud of his administration's COVID response. And I would also remind people that all states initially did have lockdowns. Every state, whether they were Democrat or Republican, except for South Dakota. South
Okay,
Dakota was the only state in the United States that never had any sort of lockdown at
really?
any point in time. Yes. The state of Florida was kind of the next big state to end their lockdowns, but they had lockdowns for many months. And then eventually Texas also ended their lockdowns, and then a few more Republican states ended their lockdowns. Um, but they all participated in the lockdowns from the very beginning. And I really don't like when people like Ron DeSantis or Greg Abbott, those are the governors of Florida and Texas, brag about ending the lockdowns, and they never talk about why they did the lockdowns in the first place, you
Mm.
know, and who convinced them to go along with this whole big agenda, because they just act like they were perfect from the get-go when they really weren't.
And in the case of South Dakota, was it Democrat? Was it Republican? And
Well,
like how did and did they did well?
yeah, they did. Oh, absolutely. They didn't have people, dying in the streets, from COVID. They just went on with their normal lives. South Dakota, their governor is Republican, Christy Nome,
Okay.
and she's not extremely like an extremely popular figure, in I would say in general in Republican or conservative politics here in the US. I mean, she'll give some speeches from time to time, but people don't really point to her as this prominent leader of the Republican Party or conservative, movement. Um, if anything, she might be more philosophically libertarian than we would realize. But South Dakota, it's a less populated state.
Okay.
It doesn't get a lot of attention, and I don't know like how strongly they're Republican, but I know that their governor at the time was Republican. So, um, but that's just that. I don't know that that says that much about the Republicans and their actual policies because
Mm,
every other Republican governor enacted the lockdowns.
mm.
So I don't think
Well,
they can be given credit for being anti-lockdown.
hmm. We are almost finishing, and let's talk about now a little bit more of foreign policy and the hot topic. Um, Politics nowadays already exceeds the borders between countries, and some actors from authoritarian regimes such as China, Russia, or Iran try to favor governments that are friendlier to them in Latin America. But this is detrimental to freedom. What is the United States Libertarian Party take on this? What can we say in the face of this situation that both Republicans and Democrats have ignored?
I would say that just in the same way that the United States libertarians oppose foreign military intervention or what we would call entangling alliances. That's to borrow a phrase from the founding fathers of the United States. Like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, the first president of the United States. He spoke against. He warned Americans against getting involved in entangling alliances in his farewell speech at the end of his term as president. And many of the founding fathers were very concerned about creating a standing army, about getting involved in foreign wars or foreign alliances. They knew that it would cause problems. And US libertarians today still firmly believe that we should not be getting into entangling alliances such as NATO, um, because NATO is like it has expansionary policies. At this point, NATO has been looking to add more countries to its military alliance, including Ukraine, and that has increased tension in Eastern Europe as opposed to encouraging, more peace and more stable international relations. So I would say that Latin American countries should be equally hesitant, reluctant, or opposed to getting involved in a military alliance with countries like China or Russia, just like they should be very concerned and wary of getting involved militarily with the United States. Just because the United States is geographically closer doesn't mean that it's in the interests of Latin American people to be in a military alliance with the United States because the United States is out there stoking tensions in so many different countries in the Middle East, in the war on terror, funding insurrection, and what we think of as the sort of moderate rebels in whatever countries we're seeking to destabilize or to do regime change. We've done that throughout Latin America. We've done that throughout the Middle East and other parts of the world, and it's really it's caused a lot more tension and ultimately a lot more war and a lot more destruction. So I would think that that people in Dominican Republic or other parts of Latin America would not want to be involved in these entangling alliances. Is that does that answer your question, or what are the things I can elaborate more on?
Um, Actually, in the case of NATO, um, I make the question that I will think that it is kind of a figure for freedom, let's say, and democracy, in the sense that to be part of NATO, uh, members have to agree to let somebody in, and in each country has to do a referendum also to be part of NATO. And in terms of a free society, of a free country, if part of like the ideas of freedom from, let's say, uh, people, thinkers as John Locke, they will say, okay, so if you want to get together and defend your own property against whoever else that wants to impose their agenda into you, I mean, you are like good to go. So in the case of NATO, wouldn't be a that kind of like defense agreement, and that or at least, or maybe another kind of like treaty in which uh, countries go voluntarily and agree, okay, let's defend ourselves from countries like China, Iran, Russia. It's not like NATO is imposing itself uh, to countries, like, okay, you have to be part of me or whatever. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, because I will think that NATO will like be kind of like, the most closer to the nearest thing to freedom, and to like to keep freedom in the West or any other region.
Well, I can see where you're coming from with regard to, in general, sort of in theory, ideas of self-defense, like individuals and small communities could certainly band together and have an alliance for the purpose of self-defense and to deter um, aggression from outside, would-be enemies. However, on the scale that we're talking about with NATO and many big governments around the world, um, it's like on that scale, these are such big governments and big militaries that have demonstrated over many years their malicious intent, imperialist policies, um, just very pro-war policies, uh, that it's to join an alliance with the United States military. You'd be attaching yourself to getting involved in so many different countries, with sanctions, um, regime change operations, military exercises. Like, for instance, Ukraine isn't even part of NATO, and the US and NATO have been doing military exercises in Ukraine, including a military exercise on it's sort of simulating. This was before Russia invaded Ukraine. Um, the United States and Ukraine were simulating what it would look like for there to be a cyber attack from Ukraine into Russia. They're doing like these different military exercises and operations, and opening up military bases all over the place, for that matter. That it stokes tension, and it gets to the point where, it's no longer a defensive alliance. It's really an aggressive alliance that's seeking to force as many countries as possible to submit to the will of whatever this um, global military power wants. And we've seen time and time again that it's not really just American government per se, but big American corporations and those throughout the kind of like Western countries, big corporations and big banks have profited from starting wars and waging wars, selling weapons, funding military operations, you know, creating money and loans and debt in order to fund wars and military operations. That it's an industry, it's a for-profit industry to escalate tensions throughout the world. So I would just, as an individual, it's like I wouldn't want to join an alliance with my neighbor if I knew that they were, I mean, like an aggressive, if not murderous person. Like if my neighbor had a lot of guns and theoretically has a capability to help defend me, but they go around killing people, then I don't want to join an alliance with them, because then I have to get involved in any fights that they start. And I think that that's what we're seeing happen with NATO, is that Western countries like the United States start wars on purpose so that their corporations can profit from them.
Okay. Well, we appreciate your kindness with your libertarian brothers in Latin America. In the specific case of us as a libertarian political movement in the Dominican Republic, what advice will you give us to grow and push the message of freedom with greater force?
Well, I feel so grateful to get to have this conversation, and hope that it's of value, and would think that more productive conversation like this is one thing, that can help move us forward towards our goals. Building relationships, um, both internationally and, like I said, on the local level, building community on the local level. That's ultimately where libertarians can stand to have the most influence. And simultaneously, through education as well as politics, so that people grow to understand the libertarian philosophy more and put it into practice in their own lives. Like I mentioned, whether you are experimenting with using alternative currencies, or precious metals in your economic transactions. That's something that anybody can do without having to go and pass a law or get elected to office. You can figure out how to become less dependent on big multinational corporations and big governments for the things that we need in our lives. So I would think that, my fellow libertarians there in Dominican Republic can create their own little micro economy, like I'm working to do here in the US in my area, is to um, basically find better sources of, food and all of life's necessities from more local sources, and just more, other libertarians. We want to, I would say, actually, to mention another author who's been pretty influential for me. Um, His name is Samuel Edward Konkin the third, and he's written a number of different books on what he coined as agorism or
Okay.
counter economics. And I think that that's definitely, he's been an influential figure in the libertarian movement in general. And I think that his ideas, are still very important today. So that's another thing that I would mention is, for libertarians throughout the world as they're building local communities to also basically keep their money local, and practice libertarian ideas in your own life in a small way. I think that it can have a big impact, as it compounds and as we become less dependent on big government and authoritarian systems.
Thank you so much. It has been an awesome time, and thank you for having this time to talk about these things that are really important to know from the viewpoint of the U.S. and the Libertarian Party. So, and I'm hoping that we will be able to continue to build a relationship with the party and different figures and uh, different people that are like other authors that are part of the Libertarian Party and people that are part of the Voices of Freedom there.
Definitely. Thank you very much. I look forward to more conversations in the future. And I invite you and all of our other libertarian organizations throughout the world to let us know how we can work together. I'm involved in a number of now international libertarian organizations, two in particular, or really the main one would be the International Alliance of Libertarian Parties, or the IALP.
Okay,
And that's a group that's seeking to help libertarian party organizations like yours and like mine work together, collaborate, share best practices, and help each other grow. Um, and there's another great organization I would point people to called Liberty International,
okay,
and they do really good work on libertarian education throughout the world. They have some online educational programs coming up, and they have an international conference taking place next year in Madrid, in Spain.
okay.
And so I'm definitely eager to do anything that I can and that we can here in the US to support the libertarian movement worldwide. So um,
Awesome.
I just appreciate your desire to collaborate.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you so much. And for all the that will for all the people that are listening that will listen in the future, we will be having this video with subtitles in Spanish later on for you to also enjoy and reflect. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much, Miguel Duque.
Muchísimas gracias. Un gran placer y gracias por su tiempo.
Siempre.